workshop session into order. And so we'll do like we normally do. We'll just move down through every item on the agenda, and I'll read them as quickly as I can. And board members and superintendent, if there's an item that you'd like for me to stop, that you have comments or questions about, please just let me know. All right, of course, the first item will be called to order. Second item will be changes to the agenda and approval of the agenda. Third item is recognitions, a proclamation of educational support, professional day presented by the superintendent. Visitors will be 4.1 presentation of Fort Walton Beach High School's 50th anniversary challenge coin presented by Mr. John Spolsky, principal, Fort Walton Beach High School. And 5.1 would be public comment, members of the public desiring to address the school board, and they have to complete Form MIS 5241. And so at this time, Mr. Attorney, I'm holding a blue card from Mr. Raymond Hope from Baker, Florida, and Mr. Hope would like to speak to us for 4 minutes regarding Best and Brightest. Please come forward, Mr. Hope.
This group gets no less intimidating.
You got a lot of paper there. You get 4 minutes.
Two things. First is just questions about where we stand on the disbursement to adult teachers. Second thing is the Auditor General's office has released a preliminary report on the findings from last year's disbursement. Do y'all have copies of that?
You do.
Or
Rita?
I have.
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
is it okay if I hand out copies of that?
Well, the CFO, I think, has distributed that.
Okay.
Let me add, Ms.
Okay.
Scallon, did you distribute the Auditor General's report to the board?
Okay. It's the preliminary and tentative findings, and so they send them to the district, and they also sent them to your attention and to the school board chairman's attention. And typically what happens is we have 30 days as district management to respond, whether we are in agreement with the finding or not, and if we are, what the corrective action is that we're taking. We are in that 30-day period, and so those formal responses have not been sent back, which will become part of the final official preliminary and tentative report. And so I received a public records request via Eric, I believe it was Tuesday, about releasing the preliminary and tentative audit findings, and so I had to inquire as to whether it was a working document or not. But anyway, I was told that it was not, so that's why I've released those two to this gentleman that requested them.
Okay.
Okay.
And if it's the same document,
It is.
I have read it.
Chairman, if Mr. Pope has documents he wants to give us, so I'd be happy to receive them.
Okay. It's a
If
copy of the
that's-
same.
I don't see what harm it could do.
It's just a copy of the report without our responses.
Right.
And it was, the reason for that report was simply good news. We, as adults, got paid last year, and there are no findings on the adults being paid last year.
Ms. Scallon, I think you may want to comment regarding that. Now, if I remember, if this is the same report, there were some findings regarding some others that received these funds, if that's correct.
That is correct,
Right.
and you will see the two findings that relate to the Best and Brightest,
Right.
one of them dealing with charter schools, and then the other item that's on there with Best and Brightest. But what I did want to say is that when you have an audit and you have an audit report, it does not mean that the auditor has sampled 100% and looked into 100% of financial transactions, internal controls, compliance. So it is a It is basically they do a risk assessment, and then they look at whatever topics are, or the current topics that they need to be focused on as far as risk, and then if the state has asked them to look into any other areas, and so that's typically how the audit is handled. So because there's not a finding on there, I just wanted to be clear that does not mean that they've said, yes, this is okay. So I just want y'all all to know that.
Understand. All right, Mr. Hope.
That was what I had, and just
Oh.
kind of curious where the board stood at this point.
Board members wish to make a comment, they may.
Well, I believe Mr. McGinnis, can you elaborate on our submission to the
Yeah,
State Attorney General's
The
office?
Attorney General's office has the request for opinion. I've had a couple of communications with them, providing them some supplemental information, and they're currently working on that, but we don't have any response back yet.
All right, any other questions or comments, board members? For Mr.
Well,
Hope?
when I looked through this earlier, I thought under the circumstances, really, I didn't see nothing to get all that seriously alarmed about. I don't know if you other board members looked. I mean, naturally, we don't correct the things they mentioned, but to me, I thought considering the whole, in the previous years, to me, I didn't really see nothing to be alarmed about at all myself. I mean, I don't know about a few other board members, but, most of it was, to me, kind of just minor oversights that it has always taken place ever since I've been here. And I just wanted to comment on that. I mean, I really think that overall, when you look at the scope of the entire school district, I think that the report, really, I wasn't that disappointed at all.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, probably in full response to his question, for those persons that turned their materials in by the November 1 deadline, those are being evaluated now by HR, and they will make those decisions and report to DOE in December as required.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No, that answers my question.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hope.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so colleagues, we'll keep on moving. Section 6, no administrative personnel appointments. Section 7, 7.1. Okaloosa County District School Board Internal Funds Financial Statement and Supplementary Information for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2018, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.2.
Well, we
Rita,
have a
did-
presentation by Carl Riggs and Ingram.
I'm sorry. Did I skip one?
Well,
I-
he's here from Carl Riggs and Ingram.
Did you see him?
And we do have Mr. Jowers here. If we have any specific questions or details, or would just like some general information, he's certainly here to speak to y'all. Did you?
Any thoughts or questions for Mr. Jowers or Ms. Scallon on this item?
Well, again, I think, the audit shows, considering, I think it was, again, over $12 million of internal funds. And as you just stated, what an audit's purpose is. We did have 2 findings of concern, and then the responses that are addressed. So I appreciate that we have this audit, because it is a large amount of money, over $12 million. And I would just like to remind the public that we have one bookkeeper at all of our schools. So especially at our secondary schools, where most internal funds transactions take place, that is a large responsibility, in addition to their other duties, to manage those internal fund transactions. So I appreciate all of the efforts of all of our bookkeeping staff, as well as your finance staff, Ms. Scallon. But I'm, thankful that we have these annual reports to review and ensure that we continue to strive for perfection. And I think this is the least number of findings, if I recall, in recent, history.
Absolutely.
So again, kudos to our staff, and I know we'll continue to address the concerns that were mentioned in the report, but I'm very appreciative of the hard work and efforts of not just our bookkeeping staff, but the volunteers, the coaches, the instructors for the various organizations that need to collect internal funds because we can't fund them from the district. So I appreciate all the efforts of everybody to make sure all their I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Yes, ma'am, and just to follow up with what you're saying, this is $12 million that has been raised by schools, communities, fundraisers, parents, selling oranges and all kinds of stuff for kids to be able to do extracurricular and also, sponsorships for the different clubs in the schools.
And I would just remind people, because it comes up when I'm out with my kids often, that we don't fund sports activities, for example, from the district, which people were surprised. And so, again, these fundraising efforts, whether it's through ticket sales or donation or fundraisers, as you mentioned, that's how those programs are able to exist, whether it's a sports program or Odyssey of the Mind or a theater program. All these various programs are in need of these fundraising efforts.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And just to follow up, and you're correct, we don't. The only part that we do fund is supplements to the various coaches and
Right.
athletics, and then we do provide some
Capital.
band repair money
Right.
and some band equipment replacement money. But by and large, it is a school-driven monetary source of revenue.
Mr. Chairman, I would
Yes,
like to
ma'am.
thank Mr. Jowers for being here this morning. You always work so well with us and guide us. Sometimes we need guidance,
Yeah.
and we appreciate it very much.
We're very appreciative of the school district. We've had a long relationship with you. We certainly appreciate working with you and Rita and Julie and the whole finance staff and all the bookkeepers. They treat us well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jowers. All right. If there's no other comment, let's move on now to 7.2. In-county travel paid for the period of October 4, 2018, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.3, out-of-county travel paid for the period of October 4th through October 24th, 2018, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. Section 8, consent agenda. 8.1, approval of the consent agenda. 8.2, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of October the 8th, 2018, minutes of workshop meeting October 18th, 2018, minutes of regular meeting of October 22nd, 2018, all recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.3, appropriation of District 1 School Board member capital outlay funds to Kenwood Elementary School for tubing for a canopy to the permanent building in the amount of $9,346, presented by Lamar White and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
I just had one question. That canopy is not related to the portable canopy discussion later on. Is that correct?
This is a request from the principal.
Right.
And it might be an item that we would look at with Mr. Koutsaratus and Mr. Bolton.
Yeah.
Well, I think it states that it's going to a permanent building.
It's
Right,
not, it's
yeah.
not near any of the portables.
Portables,
It's
yeah.
separate. It's-
Okay.
It's not part of the plan that we'll come to later. That's
Okay,
right.
thank you.
8.4, appropriation of District 2 School Board member capital outlay funds to Richburg School for items for the life skills room to include a 3-compartment sink faucet, and freezer in the amount of $1,618.94, presented by Mr. Dewey Destin and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, I would like
Yeah,
to
sure.
thank my fellow school board member, Mr. Destin, for your contribution to Richburg School. That will go a long way with their program that they have there. And of course, with all the construction that we did over the summer, that will just enhance that program for years to come. So thank you for your contribution, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, 8.5, Budget Amendment Number 1, Fiscal Year 2018-2019, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.6, Monthly Financial Statement for September 2018, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.7, Invoices to be approved for payment, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.8, School Donations, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.9, Budgetary Service Agreement Threshold Increase, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Ms. Thrush?
I guess we've had some service agreements that we have to modify throughout the year because we might be using an individual in an agreement at multiple schools. Is that the need to increase?
No, what happened was initially when we started the service agreement process, which was many years ago, both of them, whether they were paid for out of budgetary district funds or whether they were paid out of school internal funds, the threshold was $5,000. And then back, I believe it was in 2013, the board chose to reduce the budgetary funded service agreements to a threshold of $2,500. So then what happened was you had an inconsistency between for thresholds from the different sources of money.
Okay.
And so what's happened is it just creates, again, inconsistency and confusion among schools and people who are responsible for entering those service agreements and accounting for them as to, okay, if it's a budgetary, it's got to be, it's $2,500. If it's something if I'm Niceville High School and I'm going to pay for something out of my school budget, then $2,500, is the maximum, and it has to go through for approval to the board. But if it's out of internal funds, it's $5,000. So I'm just proposing that we move back to both of them being $5,000, just for consistency, ease at the school. And to cut down on confusion and potential problems. Now, it will not change the reporting to you as far as the quarterly reports.
That's what I was going to say. We still get quarterly reports.
Absolutely. Right. None of that will change. You will still get all the same information, but I just think they both need to be the same, the same level.
Chairman, if I may, sir. But will it change the fact that those appear on the agenda for approval?
No, I mean you will get those in the regular quarterly reports, like I have noted on there, and you will see those now. They would not come to you until they get to 5,000 if they're in between, those reporting periods.
Okay,
whereas
so we will have a difference that those will not appear on the agenda now. Is that correct?
Well, no,
right.
They'll be just like a school internal fund service agreement.
Okay. But they will not appear on the agenda like they have previous to this?
Not if they are less than 5,000.
That's the point.
Not if they're less than, not if they're less than 5. But in cumulative, I mean, if they get beyond 5,000, of course, they're going to come to you in the agenda and also be reported on the quarter.
We will not be seeing the ones under 5,000, though.
Every quarter we will.
We will quarterly. They will not be on the monthly meetings or the bi-weekly meetings. Is that correct?
So for example, if you have a service agreement that is funded from, let's say from my department budget, I have a service agreement. If it is $3,000, if you approve raising the level to 5, then you will not see that because you have given the authority to have the threshold at 5,000. Now, of course, if it got up to 5,000, we would bring it back to you before the quarterly reporting. If it did not, then you will see it on the quarterly reporting.
It'll be on the quarterly report. It will not be on the every 2-week meetings if it's under 5,000.
That's correct. If you approve increasing that threshold.
Okay. Yeah. Probably I won't support it, but that's all right. Maybe we'll pass anyway.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Gallen. All right, 8.10, agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County, Florida and Jacobs L3, a joint venture presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And Mr. McInnes, I think you had some information you
Yes,
wanted
sir.
to share with us regarding this venture.
Yes, sir. There has been a contract arrived at that's being recommended to the board in this matter, and I wanted just to review it with you. I would let you know that the basic contract is the contract we've used in this program before, so procedurally it would operate the same way that it has. There were not any issues with district staff or finance about the way in which it operated, so that all will still continue to be the same. Just to go over some highlights, though, to remind the board of how the program works. This is a contract for a multi-site, multi-project facilities improvement program that would include remodeling, renovation, additions, and new construction, should you fund any of that. The TPM and the program management team, as the contract states, are experienced and skilled in providing program management services for design, construction, and equipping of schools and other projects. Jacobs is the managing partner of the joint venture for this contract agreement. Jacobs L3 have a joint venture agreement for this program management team, and a copy of that document is attached, and the school board is a third-party beneficiary to that agreement. The program itself is a multi-site program. As I said, it could potentially include remodeling, renovation, additions, and new construction, as you would put those into your capital project priority list programs. The owner has the right under this agreement, as you've had in the past, to direct the TPM to perform selected type work on a time and materials or firm fixed price basis. That's with the board's direction. Other than that, it's a GMP program, but we did put that in the last round for certain smaller projects, should the board choose to do that. The responsibilities for services: the TPM will be fully responsible for all aspects of design of projects under the agreement, including pre-design, schematic design, design development, and budgeting. All design services will be performed by licensed professionals as required by Florida law. There will be a list of pre-qualified design firms that will be delivered back to the district within 120 days of approval of this contract, and that's consistent with how we've done that previously. And the qualifications will be done through pre-qualification or under the selection process under the Florida Consultant Competitive Negotiations Act, which is statutory. Construction services will be performed by qualified construction contractors and suppliers selected by competitive bid processes, and they will be paid by the TPM, and they will be under contract with the TPM. That's one of the features of this program we've had all these years, which has served the district well, and that is the school board itself is not under contract directly with contractors, suppliers, or other vendors in these matters. That is done through the TPM. The TPM will be allowed to self-perform only if approved by the owner. We do leave that option there in the event there were a project that had some kind of issue that they needed to do that, but they have to come back to this board for that kind of authority. They don't have any authority to self-perform on their own. Under the category of the TPM responsibilities, they are to provide all program services that were outlined in Section 2 of the RFQ, and the RFQ document is attached as an exhibit to this contract, and those terms and conditions are included. The TPM will coordinate with a seat management contractor to ensure that board-approved technology standards are in all task orders if they have any application to technology. Those standards are periodically updated by the district to keep with current technology, and they'll be following those. They're responsible for developing a master program budget and a master cash flow schedule for their task orders, and they are to develop a master schedule for the program when the district lays that out. The project services, consultants, contractors, and subcontractors will perform according to terms and conditions of their agreements with the TPM. So once again, the TPM will hold all of those contracts, not the district. The educational specifications requirements, this has been in the contract these years. It's a very important component. The TPM will work with the district to develop and submit project-specific educational specifications to be sure that any construction is done in accordance with Florida DOE regulations. As they do that, the contract requires them to consult and involve school principals or their designees at that site for those standards and specifications. The TPM is obligated to make recommendations back to the owner once they look at projects and look at task orders regarding the constructability, and to do potential value engineering once they see prices on that to ensure that the district is getting a good price. The GPM, the guaranteed maximum price, is the basic standard for how their task orders will be priced out and included. And the GPM will include the cost of work, which we fully define in Article 6 of the contract. It will include contingencies and allowances and their TPM fee. The contingency is restricted under this contract. It can be no more than 3% of the GPM for new construction and no more than 6% of the GPM for renovations. And they are required by contract to limit the program-wide design services under their criteria documents to 7.5% of the GPM. Those caps were put in place some years ago to protect the board and to provide some guidance to the TPM as they're pricing. We have retained your right to retain an independent estimator, as we have done throughout this entire program, and that has been a very important part of this program, that when they deliver a proposed GMP to the board, it goes straight out to an independent third-party construction estimating firm. They run all their own numbers and they report back to the board what range they find those prices in, and if they're within an acceptable market range, you know that before you authorize the work to proceed. And once again, that's been an important part of this program over the years. The TPM, with your authority and on your behalf, issues bid packages and conducts pre-bid conferences and can issue modifications to those packages. The contract requires them, as it has in the past, to identify in good faith all contractors in Okaloosa County that may be capable of performing any of the project work to bid on it. They will provide a list of those contractors to the owner for information. All the contractors are required by contract to be notified of bid packages, pre-bid conferences, etc. And the TPM is to give due consideration to local performance provisions in their bid packages consistent with any applicable laws. So that is still required under this. We do have a provision that allows, if there is a project under $100,000, they can consider a waiver of the bond requirements, because that is an additional cost that ends up back to the district, and we put that provision in some years ago so that on smaller projects, and that would be consistent with the state law, that it's not requiring those bonds on smaller projects. Beyond that, they have a duty to obtain performance and payment bonds on all the other work that is done under the statutes. We do have a sales tax exemption program in place that has operated all these years to allow the district to save the sales tax on the direct purchase of equipment and materials. That is still in the program and will still be implemented. The agreement term, this agreement is for an initial term of 5 years, and it may be renewed upon the mutual agreement of the parties for an additional 5-year term. It's not an automatic renewal. It would have to come back to this board for review and negotiation. There's a provision for liquidated damages in this contract, and those are done by task order and are based upon the schedule and the working days of any delay. We have always maintained language under delay that has them acknowledge that they know what the weather conditions are in our area, and we've defined those from way back in the program so that we didn't get time delays based upon certain kind of weather, because we've said if you're operating in our area, you know these things are to be expected and you should work that into your schedule. So we've maintained that language in the contract. The contract calls for the board to continue having an owner's representative work on this program. The compensation, there has been no change or increase to the TPM fee. It is 5.25% of the cost of work. The TPM also, we have continued the cost reduction incentive bonus, which is a savings plan. The board still gets 60%. We negotiated that down some years ago, and that has retained that same level, so no changes there. Cost of work, as I said, is fully described and defined under Article 6 of the agreement, so that there are parameters that they have to follow when they price these jobs. 6.2 lists things that cost shall not include, and those are laid out and those are checked. They can't include those when they're pricing. The price guarantee, the board is liable to compensate them for the GPM, but not for amounts in excess of the guaranteed price unless there is a change order, and that has to be agreed to by the district, and there are limitations on that. In essence, we have always said to them, we will not approve change orders, and you will not submit a change order for any request to correct errors or omissions on the part of the TPM or any of its sub-consultants, subcontractors, or materialmen. So that is not acceptable as a change order, and we've not ever had an issue with that. If there's a mistake or an issue like that, they have to eat that under their GMP. If there is a change order that decreases the cost of work, then we receive a deduction in their fee based upon the change down to the new rate. So their fee doesn't stay there if the cost of work is change ordered down. So that's to the benefit of the school district. We have provisions in this contract for them to withhold retainage as they pay out to their contractors, subcontractors. We have them hold 10% through 50% completion of a project and 5% through the remaining balance of the project completion, and that has worked well. We haven't seen any kind of problems with that. The TPM is not paid their fee on savings, so when we do that incentive savings division, we don't pay a TPM fee on savings. We also do not pay from the sales tax avoided. That's not part of the savings that they're paid on. If we avoid sales tax on purchases, that benefit comes back to the district. They are required to maintain insurances, a very comprehensive insurance section in this contract, and they've always maintained that. As I said earlier, they are required to secure payment and performance bonds for each project based upon those values. The contract also makes clear that all designs, drawings, specifications, and all other work they perform and do as they're working on this are considered works for hire for the district, and they become the sole property of the district, which we pay for. Then we own all of those planned designs and all those materials, and they work to try to create designs and plans that can be reused and replicated. So if they have a design for a classroom, they try to design it so that it can be reused at another location. Obviously, site work has to be done differently, but the actual facility construction, they do try to create that if it's appropriate. And Mr. Chairman, that's an outline of the high points of the agreement. I wanted to take the sufficient time with you to go over that because this is obviously a large contract, but the contract itself is the document we have used in this program. The procedures for pay and finance and all those things will be the same as they have been, and so it's here for your consideration.
Very good, Mr. McInnes. Board members, any comments or questions about it?
I have one
Yes,
question.
Sir. Yes, sir.
I noticed on the owner's representative in the contract it said as designated by the chairman or his designee. That's, if I recall correctly, we did that through a motion and a vote.
That's
is that
correct.
a change?
This has not been changed. I mean, that language has been in the contract, but the chairman has always deferred to the board to appoint that person.
That would be my intent at the organization meeting,
Well,
if I'm the chairperson.
and that would be my argument. I think it needs to be clear in there that the owner representative.
We can revise that. That was
Yeah.
not changed. I mean, that was not a change made
Okay.
for this
Well,
round.
I feel more comfortable if it spelled it out
Sure.
because, you know.
We'll just say
Chairman's
as
change.
designated by the board.
That's it. And the other question, do you have a red line version? In other words, are there other changes that a red line version would show us?
I certainly can provide that to you. There were, for the most part, the changes were just cleanup. It was correcting a citation or correcting a year on something. The one thing that we added was we already had language in there talking about the contract language taking precedent over any other conflicting documents. We did add a section to make it clear that if there was any conflict in terms and conditions between the RFQ document and this contract, that this contract prevail, because the contract is much more thorough and explains all of that. Mr. Destin, that I believe was the only change like that. The document was in good order and has been cleaned up. I made cleanups myself to references to the AIA year document and to page numbers and things like that. There were not other material changes. The rates that are attached under the exhibits did not change. Their fee did not change. Shared savings did not change. But I certainly could get you the red line, and I'd be happy to do that.
That would be very nice to look at, because in contracts, words matter, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Mr.
Right.
Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
that's what I was going to request too, a red line copy. And then in regards to the change orders, and maybe Mr. Bolton or Mr. Kutsaratus could help recollect my memory, you know, how do we have, what language is in the contract to hold the TPM contractor accountable? So for example, if I recollect that Blue Elementary self-help project that was done through TPM, you know, during the part of the process, it was identified, you know, what could be performed based on the funding that that self-help project could fund. But then during that time, it was revealed that there were some concerns with electrical. And so there might have not, and again, I'm just speaking off memory, so I could be incorrect. So there might not have been a change order, but then the total scope of the project had to be reduced because there was increased cost to deal with the unforeseen electrical issues. And so, in effect, it was a change because the scope of the project had to change. They weren't allowed to do, you know, something else. And so I guess that's my concern. You know, the words that you you know, relayed seemed to indicate that, you know, if something was to come up, that would be their responsibility. And I think in that same project there was something else that came up that, like, they did have to pay for, related to drainage maybe, or sewer lines. But then in the other case, they had to reduce the scope of what they could afford because of unforeseen electrical problems that, you know, maybe they should have discovered, you know, during their pre-GMP process by checking on basic utility infrastructure. So how, is there wording or language that we could improve upon that, so that if an unforeseen issue comes up, that the scope of work can't be reduced in order to compensate for that?
Well, the change orders in general are dealt with under Article 8 of the contract. And as I said, the restriction we've got is that we don't approve or allow change orders if it is the result of an error or omission on their part or their designers, consultants, contractors. So the district has to look at that if there is an issue in a project and determine if it is an error or mistake. We don't approve the change order. And like you say, there have been projects where they've just had to eat that work. I mean, but when there is a potential reduction in the scope of a project because of an unforeseen condition, and clearly if there are unknown or unforeseen conditions, and those happen sometimes in construction, they will bring forward what it's about, how it was discovered, what the cost is, and sometimes that does change the scope of the project. Unless we have additional funding to put into it, they may very well have to reduce part of the scope to pay for the unforeseen or unknown condition out there. So I don't know if that might have been what happened in that job or not, but even if there's going to be a reduction in scope, there will be a change order. I mean, we don't change the money or the scope without a change order taking care of that, or even the time. You know, if we have to change order the schedule, all of those things are done by change order.
And I guess I'm wondering who determines, whose responsibility is it to determine if something was just an unforeseen mistake or unaware, or whether it was could have been found out, or not, I don't want to say negligent, but inadequate prep work in the pre-GMP process. Who determines that?
Mr. Kutsaratus, is that something that's reviewed through your department?
Yeah, Mr. Bolton coming forward.
Yeah.
Well, depending on what it is, you have the engineers, architects, the building official, and so if it was something that wasn't obvious, it wasn't part of the scope of work, and but it was determined during the process, especially when they begin the demolition process, something behind a wall, under a floor, above a roof or something, above a ceiling, excuse me, that just wasn't part of the initial inspection and scope of work to determine the pricing. Then if all parties are in agreement there that this was not anyone's fault, and certainly this case was the electrical, and then there was a sewer issue on the outside that was, and they actually took care of it, that was on.
Right, because I requested that they double check that.
Right. So it would have to be a mutual understanding coming together that if their claim is that it wasn't part of the scope of work, and we see it and realize the same thing, then if all parties are in agreement, we're dealing with a guaranteed maximum price. So that's where you've got to weigh out if we don't have the funds to increase it to begin with, then we had to take something away in order to fix what was determined. That could be the case.
And I guess my question is then, what is the language if there wasn't a mutual agreement? I mean, because of those professionals you mentioned, our only employee is the building inspector, the architect, the engineers. They all work for the GMP contractor. So, you know, what language is there?
Well, there is additional language, like under 8.2, that's where we define concealed, unknown, or hazardous conditions. And so those things are laid out under 8.2.1 and 8.2.2, at least in the area of concealed and unknown conditions. Those are described and defined there, and so that's what would be looked at if a change order came in. We would have to identify what's causing this change order, and if it's one of those conditions, then we would probably agree to the change order if it meets those definitions of concealed or unknown.
And I guess maybe maybe I should talk after the meeting to Mr. Bolton and the attorney about, you know, what's required in that pre-design. Should we require that at a minimum all utilities are inspected that could potentially be impacted by the scope of work? So that, you know, if we're installing a new bathroom, that the pre-GMP has included a look at the sewage and drainage system, or if we're installing an air conditioning unit as part of the big scope of work, that we've evaluated the electrical infrastructure of the building and its ability to handle whatever we're adding. Can we require that in the pre-GMP?
I'm not sure we're ever going to get language that's going to cover everything. When we're dealing with the age of our buildings, that lots of things were done in many years ago that there's no record, no plans, unfortunately, and that's way before all of our time. So some things were done that they're bound to come across when they begin to dig or whatever the case may be. So you can line up the language legally as good as we can get it, but that's still not going to guarantee we're going to catch everything in the future.
Yeah,
with
we run into those issues primarily when it is a remodel. I mean, obviously for new construction, they're dealing with it from the ground up. Now, you can also refer to Exhibit C, which is the criteria document specifications, and that has been laid out in part to cover all the various areas that we're asking them to look at as they begin designs on each project. Now, some of these are not applicable to every project out there, but that is a comprehensive criteria document list that they are typically working on, as I understand it, as they're doing their pre-GMP, their preliminary designs. They're supposed to be covering these areas if they apply to that kind of project.
Okay. I'll talk afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any other comments or questions about 8.10? All right, let's go ahead then, move on to 8.11, ITB 19-03, paper for offices and classrooms. Presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.12, tag on bid RFP 18-30, USDA Commodity Processing Services, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.13, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, International Restaurant Distributors Incorporated, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.14, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, Apple Incorporated, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.15, tag-on bid RFP 151702, dispensing system for general cleaning supplies, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.16, service agreement number 19-67, Ethica LLC, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.17, sale and disposal of surplus property, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Director of Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.18, affiliation agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County, Florida, and Consulate Healthcare, Destin Healthcare, and rehabilitation for the practical nursing program at Okaloosa Technical College, presented by Rena Weinert, LPN instructor, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.19, extension of second grading period of the School District of Okaloosa County 2018-2019 school calendar from Thursday, December 20th to Wednesday, January 9th, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent of MIS, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I just have
Yes, sir,
one
Mr.
question
Bynum.
regarding the high school. Will their exams still be before the Christmas break? That's
Yes.
okay.
And again,
Yes,
just
ma'am.
for the public, this revision is taking place because of the missed days that we had due to the 2 hurricane situations. But, you know, I agree with Mr. Bryant, just to make sure everybody's aware that in student terms, this semester is, for exam purposes, is ending before winter break.
All right, very good. All right, moving on to Section 9, Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations 9.1, Employees on Administrative Leave, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. 9.2, Deferred Retirement Option Program Drop, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. 9.3, Out of Field Report for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director of Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.4, Personnel Recommendations, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.5, Employee Transfers, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.6, Employee Separations, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, Employee Suspension, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.8, Employee Termination, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.9, Reinstatement Reimbursement of Sick Leave due to Line of Duty Illness, Injury, Medical Examination, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.10, Leave Without Pay, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. All right, discussion agenda, Section 10, 10.1, Proposed Capital Outlay Plan for Covered Walkways to Portable Buildings, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Director of Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And so, Superintendent, I think Mr. Bolton may want to come forward. And then I believe, Ms. Scallon, there probably are some budgetary considerations that you'll speak to as well. All right, Mr. Bolton, please come forward and tell us kind of what the thinking is here.
At the request of the board, we went to the schools, did some measurement to all the measuring to all the portables that do not have canopies, covered walkways currently leading to them. So those measurements were done, and we obtained an estimate from a local contractor, just an estimate. And of course, all of this would have to be bid out if it were recommended to go in this direction. But we provided the estimates per school, and we started with the first year one, a group of schools. We took an amount looking at around $200,000 to cover the first year, and then likewise the second year for the next group of schools that have been the longest without covered canopies to their portables, the portables that have been there the longest. And likewise then year 3 would be your next group, and year 4. So spread out over 4 years. The amounts you see there with the spreadsheet, and we've worked with Ms. Scallon, Mr. Kutratis and I as far as identifying this money. And of course I won't speak to where the funds would come from, but we've have a plan to fund at least the first year if the board elects to approve this plan. This is a plan that would, knowing that we have a need for permanent classrooms in the future, this is a low-cost canopy that would, knowing that we may have to turn around and tear these down, hopefully we will achieve some revenues in the future that we could construct new classrooms. But this was looked at in that way as far as what would be the least cost that would provide the canopies, meet that objective, meet that goal, as well as keeping in mind what may happen in the future. So we have those first few schools listed, and of course the other schools in the out years there, pending the continuation of this plan, would continue on with those plans. So this would not be internal maintenance, working on the canopies as we've done in the past with the welders and such, but we would bid this out to local contractors and see what we would be able to gain from that.
All right, and so on this particular item, I believe you've attached your plan, so we can see what the 4-year plan is and how it is that would be done.
What I would like to suggest, and what this board would consider, and I'll be gone, but what I would suggest is Mr. Destin and Ms. Thrush was very concerned, and rightfully so. And what I've sit down and work with the finance officer is, to me, what I think the board, I'd like to think the board to do would be to address the 12 ESE portables. It's been a very concern of this entire board. And Ms. Scallion has already worked out a plan that would fund to take care of these 12 ESE portables immediately, which is the goal that we've indicated we've had lengthy discussion for. And we was discussing, she had found a way to fund those 12 portables immediately, and they could be done during this current school year immediately. And then by doing that, then we would leave the vehicle budget intact, because Ms. Scallion had found the money elsewhere, and she can show you how she can show you board how she's done that. And then we'll go ahead and immediately take care of our ESE children with the funds that she can show you how she's funded it without having to affect the vehicle budget. Then what we'll do is Mr. Destin's pointed out, and I agree with him, is looking at maybe we may decide to go a lease direction or something. But what I would like to see possibly is this board just go ahead, and the fact that Ms. Scallion has worked out a way to take care of the ESE canopies, and then we'll go ahead and take care of the vehicles, and then Mr. Destin and the chairman would then want to make sure that the maintenance department then will get with y'all for the next budget year of deciding where it's gonna be best to go with a leasing program or go like we've done, or a combination. And truthfully, with the portable project that we just discussed, yes, that's fine to have a 4-year plan, but I think all this board understands, like I do, I'd love to see us be able to hopefully pass a sales tax sometime in the future, and as long as we comply with the law that we have to do on the canopies for these portables, then I think this board will move along and try to do them as quickly as they can, but not be in a tremendous rush, assuming that if we do pass a sales tax, that our goals will be to get rid of them. But for right now, the big concern, and I agree, is we should go ahead and take care of our ESE students with these 12 portables. We've got a way to do that immediately, and we'll have it done even before this school year. Hopefully we'll be out. And to me, then the overall large plan for the regular canopies, this board then can decide, and if Ms. Gahan can provide the funds, then we may start doing some of those and ones we have to do. And that to me would be what I think would be a very sensible approach to take care of our ESE kids, and then go ahead and be able to allow us to have our vehicles this year. But as Mr. Destin, I don't think, and I know I wasn't either, is we probably need more information on looking at maybe where we don't go direction of leasing. But since we already have the budget in place and we've now found the money for our ESE canopies, that we go ahead then and make sure that they come with a plan to you board members that will explain exactly what the pros and cons are of leasing or staying like we've been. And that would be my suggestion. I don't know how you other board members feel.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Walker, and you're exactly right. All 3 items are here for discussion together because the board's actions, said that we would bring all these up at this time. Mr. Bolton, I appreciate the plan that you've provided. Board members, it might be good now for Mrs. Scallon to talk a little bit about the funding of the first year of this plan. And Mr. McInnes, I think legally, as I understand it, how far in advance can the board fund a program? I mean, are we compelled to fund it on a yearly basis, or can we fund it multi-years, or maybe that would be good for us to kind of understand?
The board approves funding on an annual basis per budget. So while they can present to you, as they have, a proposed multi-year program, you would be voting to fund it year by year in your budget, not committing a future board or a future budget to that project. You certainly can approve something as your goal or your intended program, but the funding has to be done each year as your budget.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McInnes. All right, Ms. Scallon.
Okay, I think attached to the agenda item were the 2 documents. One was the proposed 4-year plan to cover all portables in the district. My understanding of the funding goal was to see if we could identify money to potentially fund the first year of this plan. And then my further goal was to try to not have to reduce the funding in some other project that had been approved by the board through the normal budget process. So with that being said, that's what we started out to do. On the sheet that you have attached, currently we had $41,515.83 that was in a portable canopy project. Okay, $25,000 of that was new revenue that you approved in this year's budget, and then the difference was money that rolled over from last year. So that was already in place. So then I began to look at projects and talk with various areas on these projects as to whether they were completed or not, because that would be a potential source of revenue that would not alter any other project that had been approved or not completed. So first one was maintenance vehicles and equipment, and so if you'll remember, the budget that you approved was $290,000. what has been proposed and presented on the agenda is a total of $242,000. That is for the vehicles and for the reel mower. So there was a difference there of $56,764.29. So I propose to redirect that money, which was left over, to the Canopy project. There was a Laurel Hill iPad project, and that project has been completed. And there was $11,825.05 there. So that would not affect any other project. Edwin's replaced sewer line. That project had also been completed.
Ms. Scallon, real quick. With the Edwin's sewer line, I was over at Edwin's the other day. Is that including that water line? Okay, so, okay.
Okay. So the Edwin's replaced sewer line, that project has been, was completed, and there was a remaining $9,248 there. Blue water boiler replacement, that project also has been completed, and there was a residual $20,695 available there to redirect. Carver Hill security system, that project was completed, and there was an available $7,088.12. The next line is transportation, replace buses. The buses had been purchased. There was a residual balance of $6,077, and as you know, we cannot buy a bus for that amount. So I propose to redirect those residual funds. We also had fire alarm upgrade district-wide. That project had been completed, and there was there's $1,562.31 there available. And then digital classroom computers from the general fund was there's $4,733.85 available there as a residual balance. So all of those I just mentioned, I would propose to redirect, and they will not affect or cause any changes or modifications to any other projects that are currently approved. And so then there was a difference of $48,145.55 between what the cost estimate for the first year is and what I had identified as potential revenue that did not impact any other area. And so then would propose to take that $48,000 from project contingency. Now what you could also do is, as we go through the course of the year and we earn interest, we could say any interest earned during the course of this year, we could redirect that back to project contingency. So then you may not get the entire $48,000, but you probably would get close. So then it would not affect any major project or reserve items.
Chairman, I want to thank the staff for coming up with a measured way to address this issue and finding the money. I think one other suggestion, at least that Mr. Guthrot made to me, is that maybe we could kick in a little of our capital construction funds that we control, and I will begin with you before Monday. I don't think it's fair to make this request and not put a little skin in the fight, so we will hopefully reduce the $48,000 by some amount that way. At least I will.
Okay.
I had some questions for probably Mr. Bolton, but while Ms. Scallon is up, my understanding is that you had shared with board members, I believe, roughly $212,000 is the revenue received from the sale of surplus items.
Okay, now what I had passed out to the board members was, I believe it was based on a request made by Mr. Destin. I went back and looked at the last 5 years, and over the course of the last 5 years, we've generated the $212,000.
Have those funds been allocated towards any particular project, or are those funds part of project contingency?
Well, those funds, I mean, as we sell the equipment, of course, it goes back into the district reserves, and then we reallocate those funds. We potentially could have or could not, because it goes back into reserves, fund balance.
Okay. And I guess, so I was wondering if there was any fund balance based off of the sale of surplus items to use or allocate, towards this project.
Okay, and when you say that to me, as far as having a fund balance account that is
Right.
just directly related to the sale of surplus items, no, we don't, because it just goes back into the generic
So
fund
there's no-
balance account.
Okay.
Now, we have a fund balance, so, you could, can I tell you that it's related to the sale of surplus or not? I really cannot tell you that.
Okay, so like a junk project, like I had that, it's, like you said, it's just pushed over, so we can't separate it out. Okay. The other item that the board has denied was roughly $198,000 was presented to the board for the completion of 2 press boxes at 2 different schools in regards to a Title IX issue. And the board denied allocating funds for that project. Have those funds been reallocated to another project?
Those funds have not been reallocated to another project, and they are currently budgeted in the in that project. So, in order to, of course, redirect those funds, it would take board action to redirect those funds for another purpose.
Okay. And then my next questions are really for Mr. Bolton, just to understand.
Thank you, Ms. Gallo.
Thank you. So again, I agree. Thank you for presenting the document, and again, thank you to Ms. Scallon for her work on the finance portion. If I look at your document correctly, you list the number of portables at a location and then the number of portables to be covered, and they don't always match. So is the assumption that some of those portables, or the difference is that those portables are covered? Because at the bottom of your grand total.
Yeah, the answer is yes. For example, Lewis, we ran a canopy all the way out to the existing portables 2-3 years ago, and then they received another portable this year. So there's one that is not covered. Likewise at Destin Middle School, the same thing, and Destin Elementary.
Okay.
Just for 3 easy examples.
And so I guess, if I add up, like Lewis, for example, the number of portables to be covered, that's a duplicate in that same portable is an ESE classroom to be covered. And then if I add 1 and 6, that's 7, but there's 3 others then that must not have ESE kids and must have coverings,
Correct.
I guess. Okay. And again, my issue is not that we don't need the maintenance vehicles or the lawnmower, but I will remind, and I know I'm not reminding, I'm talking to the choir, but I mean, we have school children on buses that have just as many miles as our maintenance vehicles and are air conditioned just as our maintenance vehicles are. And I feel pretty strongly that, and I'm culpable, because when I approve the addition of a portable at a site, I should have ensured that it had a canopy cover. So I will be proposing on Monday that, in addition to the funding that Ms. Scallon has found and explained to us, I am also hopeful that at one time we will see additional revenue to this district. But even if and when that comes, the completion date of any projects resulting from additional revenue will be 4 to 5, 6 years out. And meanwhile, we still will have students and staff getting soaked anytime there is rain. And so I would propose that I donate or reallocate, I should say, District 5 capital discretionary money of approximately $75,000 towards the project. I will also propose on Monday that we reallocate the $198,000 roughly that was presented to the board for press boxes at 2 schools be allocated for this purpose.
I
And
believe
then,
that's 108, but I'm pretty sure that project's 108,000.
oh yeah, I'm sorry, 108 and my 75. I think I was looking at the wrong thing. I was looking at 198, sorry, of year 2. So 108 and my 75, or the taxpayer's 75. And then I would like to see, as Ms. Scallon just suggested, we could allocate any interest earned to go back in project contingency. I'm wondering if we could allocate any future surplus sale revenue towards the Canopy project instead of it being put in reserves. And so that will be my motion on Monday, is to allocate District 5 capital discretionary in the amount of 75, to reallocate the 108,000 for the press boxes, and to allocate any revenue received from the sale of junk to this project.
And so a follow-up question to that. So then are you proposing that we actually move into year 2?
Yes,
Is
I'm
that-
proposing that we, you know, with, I was assuming we had some junk money that we don't have, so, or we can't distinguish, I guess. So
Right.
with the 108 and the 75 from District 5, that's 183,000. That would push us well into covering year 2. And the issue about year 2 is, you know, Blue Water, a large portion of their students are in those 10 portables, and they're getting wet every day. Likewise at Antioch, Bob Sykes, and even going into year 3, all 9 of Plu's portables are uncovered. We have some, you know, facilities that have, you know, a significant portion of their student population being in portables that are uncovered, and that they have to exit multiple times throughout the day. So I would like to speed up the 4-year projection of the project by allocating District 5 funds, as well as reallocating the press box funds, and possibly steering any junk revenue, future junk revenue, towards this project.
Okay, all right, thank you. Board members?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
to get to the crux of the matter now, though, I'm back to the original thing.
Okay.
Okay. Miss Rush and I is going to be leaving, so I'm going to depend on the new board members and the old board members to take care of the future. But right now, I would like to hope that we can come to agreement on one thing, trying to simplify it. It was indicated the board was very concerned about having canopies for ESE students. Okay, what I would hope that we would do, and I've been assured by Mr. Kucharatis that he can accomplish this no later in the summer, of being able to put canopies for these 12 ESE portables. And so what I'm hoping that we have decided here today, and when we come Monday, is at least we will approve the vehicles that we had in the budget, and we would also go ahead, Ms. Scallion has showed the board recently of how we can fund for the 12 portables. And that's what I feel like that we should go ahead and make sure we do when we vote Monday night. Now, in the future, and whatever may be down the road as far as the portables for regular canopies and all that, you board members here now and the new board members, that'll be something y'all can deal with. But I really thought that we was looking at these ESE canopies as kind of a thing that we'd really like to make sure we took care of. And I would hope that Monday night that we would at least be in agreement that we'll take care of the 12 canopies for the ESE portables. we'll leave the budget as it was for the vehicles, and then whatever needs to be decided in the future for all the other portables, regular portables, then you board members, as Ms. Scallion and y'all can work out funding for those, that will take place. And that's kind of how I would like to leave it, and I would hope Monday night that we could address that and then start getting into all the budget changes and moving. I mean, I really feel like with new board members coming on, is that something that can be decided with all you boards after y'all do your changeover. That's how I feel.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walker. All right, any further comments, board members? Okay, I guess regarding your particular proposal, the motion that you intend to make, did I understand that you would be proposing to move the funding out of the Title IX project? Is that what I understood you to say?
My understanding, it's not a Title IX project. It's a capital project that would be used to spend capital funds to, and I could be wrong, but, and I don't recall seeing a press box being a finding in or reported in our Title IX compliance documentation. But it is a project that's in our capital budget that was approved to address Title IX issues, in that those softball complexes at those two schools don't have press boxes, whereas the baseball complexes at those two schools do. So yes, it's a Title IX issue. In my understanding, it's not a Title IX project, it's a capital project to deal with that. And yes, I would be proposing, since the board voted to not allocate those funds for that project when it came before the board, that we reallocate those funds towards this canopy project, because we are statutorily required to have covered walkways to canopies, to portables.
And it may be that we'll spend some time discussing that statutory requirement that has been referenced here before, because there may be some equivocation on the term statutory requirement in terms of the actual statutory language. But I guess the issue I would have, or the concern that perhaps we might ought to talk about for a moment, is as those funds are set aside currently for a project that pretends of Title IX, if we move those funds out of that project category, how does that serve us in terms of any Title IX compliance and or potential litigation regarding Title IX if those funds are moved out of that project? Mr. McInnes, do you understand my question?
I do, but I think the board's already once taken action regarding those funds, and so I'm not sure that
just leaving them there,
just sitting there, moves towards a resolution of a Title IX issue.
I understand. Questions or comments?
Well, I do have one regarding probably what is in reference here to the statutory requirement, and I was going to ask Mr. McInnes if he could look at 1013.20, and it's basically the standards for relocatables used as classroom space, and just kind of, if you could maybe look at that law and maybe interpret it to us. And then also, you know, going back to the issue with the press boxes, you know, again, it's something that, yes, it might not have the Title IX designation as far as that goes, but I agree with Dr. White. I'm concerned with maybe future, could be future litigation in regards to that. So, but again, it was voted. I was not in the agreeing side of that, but you know, my concern was Dr. White's concern. I just felt like that could possibly lead to litigation later on if it was ever brought up.
And just to follow up, Mr. Bryant, I too was in the minority on that particular decision, and I'm a little reluctant to even talk about it because of that, except that I think that Mrs. Thrush is reopening it, so to speak, with her particular proposal that we will ultimately, again, should she receive a second, have to vote on again. Any thoughts, Mr. Destin?
Well, my thought is I hate to tangle that issue into canopies. And so we'll have to see how that shakes out when it comes time to vote.
All right.
And the other observation I would make is on whether or not we're statutorily required to cover. We don't need a state statute to tell us it's a bad idea to have kids walking in the rain.
Of course.
So that's not really important to me.
Of course.
I'd like to see us go forward and work out the compromise. Ms. Thrush is going to throw in some money. I will put some in, and we can move forward on our phased project to address the issue.
And real quick, Mr. Destin, in regards to that, I don't disagree with you there, but I think if it's being presented to us that for future board members that are coming on, there is an understanding that what the law interprets. So when these do come up, it's how we interpret the law. Now, again, I admire what you and Ms. Thrush have proposed here, and you know, and I appreciate what your concerns are. But just like me, I just want to make sure that if something is being said, you know, is being that was statutorily, I want to make sure that I personally, you know, understand what the interpretation of the law is. So, you know, in the future, then I understand when we come up against
and
these.
beyond that, too, Mr. Bryan, I would add that I think it's important for us to relay that to the public.
Right.
That what that statute is, so that we don't have any miscommunication.
Right. Because honestly, there's probably people out there watching this saying, well, they're portables, and why would we be throwing money away on canopies to portables that aren't going to be, could possibly not be there, even though we do have some that have been there for a long time. I know Baker School is probably one that comes to mind, but you know, there's probably people out there wondering, well, why are we putting money into this? So, you know, again, that's why I would just like to have that interpretation.
And so, Mr. McInnes, if you would take a look at that, I think that's the request for information. And the only other thing I would say is should Mrs. Thrush's anticipated motion prevail, I guess that there would need to be some restructure of the plan that we've been presented. And I guess that would fall upon Mr. Bolton and staff to, in other words, if there's more money put into the year one plan, then you would have to adjust this plan in response to that.
Yes, sir. And the way the bid would be done would be like a lot of our district-wide bids. So if funding is there,
you just add to it.
You just add to it if you, with the board's approval, of course.
You would just proceed with are the schools listed in order, they're just in alphabetical order for each year?
For each year, correct.
Do you have a preference of order for certain schools?
We could go back and look at that if, you know, if we get into splitting hairs of which ones just had the longest.
Right.
Well, let's don't worry about spending the money first. Let's find out first if it's going to pass or not. You know, that once we take the vote, then one thing about it is you can deal with all that after that. If it doesn't pass, then it becomes a very moot point.
That's right. All right, so unless there's any more discussion about the covered walkways, I'm prepared to move on to the next linked item. All right, 10.2, tag on bid over $25,000, Allen J. Fleet Sales, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. It's tabled at the regular meeting of October the 8th, postponed at the regular meeting of October 22nd, and here it reappears again. So, comments or questions, board members?
Well, the only comment I would have is now that Ms. Scanlon has found funds to make a good faith effort toward the canopy issue, that you know, I would just as soon let that go through. Now, Ms. Thrush did bring up a very poignant point about school buses.
Yeah.
And in our research, Ms. Scanlon and I found out that there's a myriad of options leases, lease to purchase. I've got some information this week from the Florida School Board Association in Tallahassee that would direct us to talk to a couple of districts down south who have actually made up some pretty unique options about how to get those new buses.
Buses, not vehicles.
Well, bus vehicle, either
Okay,
way.
Okay.
And so there may be some other options out there that we should explore. And I would suggest over the next few months, we need to look at them a little more detail.
And that would be for future.
Right. But there are several districts that have a lease to purchase option where they do lease them for a number of years. At the end, it's $1. It's just like we did with the telephones. And so that stretches out the initial capital investment to a point where we may be able to handle it. So something we should look at. And I've got the names and numbers for those districts. So I'll give them to Scanlon to look at and contact them.
All right. Okay, any further comments on the vehicles? All right, well, let's move on then. 10.3, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, Jerry Pate Turf and Irrigation, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Tabled at the regular meeting of October the 8th, postponed at the regular meeting of October 22nd, and here it again appears for the third time. Comments or questions, board members?
Same point of view. If we're not going to have to redirect funds away from anywhere, and we can make good progress on our canopies, then, that's a moot issue.
Okay. Anything else, board members? Mr. Bryant?
Just real quick, I know, again, the issue with the press boxes, just other things, football field at Fort Walton Beach High School. Again, this particular item is, in my opinion, it's going directly to one particular entity out there, the football field. Maybe in the future, the school looking that would look at how they could maybe fund it in a different way instead of it coming through us. But I mean, that's just my opinion on that. So.
Okay. Anything else, board members, on this item?
Well,
Sure,
I would
sure.
just add to that comment. I mean, we just had our internal fund report presentation, and I'd have to go back to that presentation. But and certainly the demographics at our different schools vary throughout the county, but a large portion of those internal funds are through football ticket sales. And again, every district in the state of Florida is doing something different with internal revenue funds. But it is concerning that a portion of those internal revenue sources received through football ticket sales cannot be used to maintain the actual football field itself or the restroom facilities that are at those football fields and other items. So that, again, that's something for a future board to consider, but I wish that we could have in the future a conversation about how this district handles internal funds and how they're used to refurbish or maintain the facilities that are used to receive those funds.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Thrush. Anything else on 10.3? All right, then let's move on. 10.4, we don't yet know. Section 11, construction program owners, representatives, business, 11.1. Mr. Walker, do you have anything, sir?
We're just going to wrap it up. This again is trying to wrap up the contract and all that for you people on Monday.
Yes, sir. All right, thank you. All right, item 12.1, CACI task order number 2-118 for camera replacement at Northwood Elementary School, presented by Mr. Dustin Keith, Specialist Seat Management, recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Yes, sir, Mr. Bond.
Mitchell, I saw Dustin was here, but I see he's gone now. Regarding this system, I know Dr. Good has talked to me about this, and I just want to make sure that will this take care of their camera problems, and will it be up to the district's? I'm sure it will be up to the district standards on what we're but I know they had like 4 cameras out the last time I was there, so. But I just want to make sure this is going to take care of those cameras.
Yes.
Okay.
These are just incredibly long camera runs, so
Okay.
that's why there's a longer period of time for completion on this than you normally would see.
Okay.
But yes, there is, this should take care of their camera issues that they're having in Norfolk.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, so Section 13 is Mr. Attorney, your business, sir.
Just one item for Monday night, back in the personnel section, when you're approving your list of retirements and separations, there is a referenced separation agreement and release there, and you would be approving that in that vote when you approve that entire category. Just wanted to clarify that. I don't have any other report.
All right, thank you, sir. And Superintendent, ma'am, your business.
Nothing today, Mr.
All right,
Chairman.
Thank you. All right, board members, I'll come around to you in just a moment, but let me point out that we do have a public hearing scheduled for Monday evening. And then, of course, we do have the opportunity for further public comment. But now we'll go ahead and do Section 15 board member announcements or requests. So, Mr. Bryant, if it's okay, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Dr. White. Just real quick, just want to put a shout out to the Crestview High School Lady Bulldogs volleyball team. They had a great run this year. They made it all the way to the Elite Eight, and unfortunately they came up a little short the other night, but I am extremely proud of those girls and what they accomplished. It would have been a great shot in the arm to the city of Crestview if they could have brought home that national or that state title, but I will commend them. They did a great job. They played some great volleyball, and from what I was told, they represented our county very well in Marion County. So, and then also real quick, my one school that's little but big at heart, I have to comment on the construction program that we have going on up at Laurel Hill School. I know that I sent Ms. Jackson and all of my fellow school board members my recent visit to the school and just talked about how much I really appreciated the construction program that was going on up there. And, you know, again, for those children that are up there, this is another opportunity for them to either go to school in the engineering field or just go into general carpentry. And I think Mr. Jackson has done a great job up there. And considering this is his first year, just seeing what they've accomplished up there just in that short time, I'm really excited about the future of the program. And, you know, for Laurel Hill School, that is just another great program for that school. And they continue to perform well up there too. So,
all right, thank you, Mr. Bryant. And Ms. Thrush.
There are numerous activities going on, as Mr. Bryant alluded to, and after this weekend we should have even more news, but I just wanted to extend a shout out to our cross-country teams in our high school. Currently, Niceville, both the boys and girls cross-country team and Baker girls are sending athletes to the state cross-country championships Saturday. I know our swim teams have been in the paper recently with their performance at their respective district and regional meets. Football, Mr. Bryant and his ribbing has created me a three-peat shirt. I did attend the football game against Niceville, but revenge could possibly happen this Friday as the schedule has allowed for them to play again this Friday. But what was very inspiring at the Crestview Niceville football game was the 80th celebration of the Crestview Band, and I just wanted to send a shout out to all of the alumni that came and performed with their band. They even had someone in their 90s who was, and I apologize for not having her name, who was also present at the game that evening, along with former band directors. So it was a great testament to the Crestview Band. Also, I know Mr. Bryant and I were able to attend the all-county choral concert, which after our last board meeting, which again was another phenomenal performance, and very excited to have the guest clinicians that our students were able to interact with. Aura Wolfgram from Fort Walton Beach High School was the Best of Show winner, a student, for her drawing entitled About Time, and it was incredible. It looks like a photo, not a drawing, at the Maddie Kelly Arts Foundation's Art Festival. So many good things our students are doing, and like I said, hopefully we'll have an update on Monday. I also wanted to pass out to board members, if you can take one, and well, here, I'll give you at a previous board meeting, I had discussed possibly a renewal to Mr. McGinnis's contract. And again, it was stated publicly. I don't have, any particular issues, but I became aware that the board itself is not reviewing on an annual basis our legal services, just as we review other services on an annual basis that the board has agreements and contracts with. So it was very helpful when Ms. Scallon provided a historical financial record of what we have been spending on an annual basis on legal services. And then I also brought up the fact that we currently have not reviewed Mr. McGinnis's contract in well over a decade. And the original that has addendums to it, I believe, was created in 1990. So one item that I've passed around to board members is 2 recommendations, and I will entertain Monday presenting a motion that we do create a new contract with the school board attorney, and I would like to add wording as I've drafted similarly to here, stating one, that the attorney shall not knowingly be placed in a position that may interfere with the full discharge of the attorney's duties to the board. We have similar language in the existing contract, but this is a little more specific and states that the attorney shall not represent a board member or a member of the administration in his or her individual capacity. And then again, we currently have language about conflict of interest, but I just felt like this was more direct and detailed than what is in the current contract. And also, there's no evaluation mechanism. So I've provided an evaluation that is used by Flagler County School District. And then, of course, the corresponding language that would need to be added to the board attorney's contract to show that on an annual basis, at the beginning of prior to the budget being approved in September and July, I would entertain that the board have a review of their legal services. It would be an opportunity for us to just review the outstanding contracts that we have. For example, we've discussed other legal service contracts that we have with Mr. Hammond, with Allen Norton and Blue, with Ms. Weatherly, and sometimes those contracts have lapsed because we're not reviewing them on an annual basis. Those contracts, for the most part, are annual contracts. And if we have a designated board meeting, say the second meeting in July or the first board meeting in July, it gives the board an opportunity to review all of our legal service contracts, including the school board attorneys. It would give us, the board, an opportunity as a board to ensure that we are evaluating our legal services that are being provided by the school board attorney and the other attorneys that we have contracts with. And then we could also review the financial amounts that we are spending on legal services. So I will be making a motion on Monday evening that we work with the school board attorney to update the existing contract and create a new contract or agreement and add the conflict of interest and the other item that I listed in this draft document, as well as the annual evaluation item. The Flagler school board attorney evaluation listed instructions as well as 5 different standards, or 6 different standards, actually 7, I'm sorry, and then their rating. And I felt like it, after trying to see what other school districts are doing, I reviewed lots of other different evaluation mechanisms, and this seemed to be fair, impartial, and comprehensive. And that's why I wanted to share it with you this evening for your review before Monday.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Thrush. Mr. Destin, do you have anything?
I don't think I have anything further this morning.
Okay. All right. Staff, anything? Anything else? Superintendent, Mr. McInnes? All right. If there's nothing else, then we're adjourned.